Hey friend, please subscribe. 1 second for you. Big deal for me. I never thought it would end this way. You know, it's funny. You spend all your time thinking that you'll notice the signs, that you'll be the one who catches it early, the one who sees through the lies. But when it happens to you, when it's your life, you can't help but feel blindsided. It was a Wednesday. Nothing special. But I'll never forget that moment, when I realized everything I thought I knew was a lie. I was sitting in the living room, scrolling through some old photos on my phone, when she walked in. Marissa, my wife, walked in like she always did after a long day, tired, distracted, a little too preoccupied with her phone. I barely looked up. I was lost in thoughts, but the faintest thing caught my attention. The faint sound of keys hitting the counter. Her eyes weren't on me, but on the screen of her phone. She had that look again, that unreadable expression, the one I had grown to fear, even though I didn't know why. She had been distant for weeks, but that was nothing new. Sometimes I wondered if it was just work stress, maybe some personal issues she didn't want to share. I told myself that. I kept telling myself that. But then it happened. She took a step toward the hallway, and for no reason at all, I decided to do something impulsive. I stood up. Hey, can we talk? I asked. My voice caught in my throat. I hadn't planned on saying it, but it came out anyway. She froze mid-step, a moment of hesitation passing between us. Sure, she replied, but her tone was flat. The usual spark, the warmth, was gone. Her eyes didn't meet mine. They were glued to her phone. I walked up to her, stood there, and in the silence that followed, I noticed something that had never been there before. It was the faintest smell on her skin. Not a perfume I recognized. Not even one she used to wear. This was different, fresh, new, and sharp, almost as if it wasn't meant for me to smell. Do you have something you want to tell me? I asked. The question felt like a foreign thing coming out of my mouth. Why was I even asking? But I had to know. She glanced at me briefly and then quickly diverted her eyes. She shifted uncomfortably, and I saw the tension in her shoulders. She shook her head, her lips tight. No, nothing. I'm just tired, that's all. Her voice didn't sound tired. It sounded off, too rehearsed. It took everything in me to hold back the frustration. I wanted to yell, demand answers, but something kept me composed. Instead, I nodded, took a deep breath, and walked past her to the closet. She had no idea I knew. I had been keeping a secret of my own. For the past few weeks, I had been watching her. Not in some creepy way, but in the way you notice someone who's slipping away from you, without even realizing it. I'd caught her in little lies. At first, they were harmless, little things like, I'm meeting Emma after work, when she wasn't meeting anyone at all. But the lies started adding up. And when I started looking deeper, things didn't make sense. I knew where she said she was going, but the times didn't match up. The dates didn't match. Then, there was the time she slipped up. She thought I wouldn't notice. She thought I didn't care. But I saw the text message flash across her screen when she thought I wasn't looking. Can't wait to see you tonight. Don't be late this time. That was when it all clicked. I knew she had been seeing someone, but I didn't say anything. I wanted to let her dig herself deeper. I needed to hear her confess, not out of anger, but because I wanted to know how deep the betrayal ran. I wasn't going to make it easy for her. So, today, I had decided to act. As I stood in front of the closet, I didn't need to plan out my words. I knew exactly what I had to do. I pulled out the suitcase, hers. The one she used for weekend trips, for work weekends, for friend weekends. The one she'd always left half-packed when she was about to go away. I packed it with everything she'd need. Clothes, toiletries, a few personal items. Things that would make her feel like she was actually going somewhere. I zipped it up, then turned to her. I walked into the living room, where she was still standing, still glued to her phone. She didn't notice I was holding the suitcase at first. She didn't even acknowledge me as I stood in front of her. Take this to his place, I said, my voice low, controlled. Her head snapped up. Her eyes widened. She froze. What? She choked, her voice barely above a whisper. You heard me. I handed her the suitcase, watching as her fingers hovered above the handle, as if she didn't know how to take it. Go on, Marissa. It's time. Take it to him. She stood there, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. The shock on her face was almost too much to bear, like she'd been hit by a truck. I could see the wheels turning in her head, the fear, the realization that I knew everything. And in that moment, all the lies, all the things I had overlooked, they hit her. She couldn't hide anymore. Why are you doing this? she finally asked, her voice breaking. I could see the guilt in her eyes now, the shame, the cracks in her composure. I didn't answer her right away. Instead, I just let the silence linger. She stood there, trembling, holding the suitcase like it was a burden too heavy for her to carry. Her mouth kept opening, trying to come up with an excuse, an explanation, but nothing came. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making her feel bad. It was about letting her know that I had known, that I wasn't the fool she thought I was. Take it, I said again, quieter this time, as I turned toward the door, my back to her. I wasn't angry. I wasn't yelling. It wasn't rage, it was quiet. It was final. She could lie to me all she wanted, but she couldn't lie to herself anymore. The silence in the room was deafening. I watched her stand there, frozen, suitcase in hand, staring at me as if I had just detonated a bomb. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. The weight of what I had just said seemed to hit her all at once. Her lips trembled, and I could see the panic slowly creeping into her expression. But I wasn't sorry. I couldn't be. She took a deep breath, her fingers clutching the handle of the suitcase as if she were trying to hold herself together. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out at first. I could feel her scrambling for the words, the excuses. I had no interest in them. I had heard enough lies. Why are you doing this? She finally asked again, her voice shaky. Her eyes flickered between me and the suitcase, her gaze shifting from one to the other like she couldn't decide where to focus. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I leaned against the wall, watching her struggle. There was a strange kind of satisfaction in seeing her so undone. It wasn't that I wanted her to be miserable. I just wanted her to face the truth. All the things she had been hiding, all the things I had allowed to slip by without saying a word. It was time for it all to come out. You really thought I didn't know, didn't you? I said finally, my voice steady, calm. You thought you could keep lying to me, and I'd just keep swallowing it all. I gave you space, Marissa. I gave you the benefit of the doubt for too long. Her lips parted in shock, but she didn't say anything. The guilt was written all over her face, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I could see a glimpse of the person I used to know, the person I thought I was married to. It was buried beneath all the secrets and deception, but it was there, if only for a second. She dropped the suitcase at her feet, the sound of it hitting the floor loud in the silence. This isn't what you think, she stammered. I shook my head, my patience thinning. Don't. Just don't. I've already seen enough. Do you really think I'm an idiot? I gestured toward the suitcase. You don't need to explain anything to me anymore. Just take it. Go to his place. The words stung more than I expected. It wasn't the words themselves, but the realization of how much I had been blind to. How long had I let her get away with it? How long had I convinced myself it was nothing? Her eyes flickered to the door, then back to me, a silent battle playing out behind her gaze. She wanted to run. I could see it in her. She wanted to turn and walk away, to pretend none of this was happening. But I wasn't giving her that option. This isn't just about you and him, Marissa, I said, my voice cold. It's about you lying to me every day, pretending everything was fine when I knew something wasn't right. You've been living two lives, and I'm done being a part of it. She took a shaky step toward the door, but stopped short. I didn't move. I didn't beg. I wasn't going to make it easier for her. She had made her choices. Now it was time to face them. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, I continued. I'm not asking you to explain anything. I'm asking you to own up to what you've done. Her eyes were welling up now, the tears threatening to spill over. Please. I didn't want it to happen this way, she whispered, barely audible. I met her gaze, my heart racing for reasons I couldn't fully understand. I wasn't sure if I was angry, hurt, or just numb. All I knew was that I had to follow through. I couldn't let her get away with it. Take the suitcase. And go. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. I just stood there, waiting for her to make the decision she'd been avoiding. But the truth was, this wasn't just about her. It was about me too. About reclaiming control, about not letting her take anything else from me. She hesitated for a moment longer, her eyes darting between the suitcase and the door. The guilt in her expression slowly shifted into something else, something darker. Finally, she reached for the suitcase. I could see her hands tremble as she lifted it, her eyes never leaving mine. It was the beginning of the end. She took the suitcase, but there was something about the way she did it. It wasn't the defeated slump of someone who had been caught. It wasn't the nervous hesitation of a woman caught in the act of betrayal. No, it was something else. It was the look of someone who had prepared for this moment in her mind. Someone who knew this day would come, but didn't want to believe it. Her fingers wrapped around the handle, but she didn't move. She just stood there for a long, agonizing minute, looking at the door, then at me. The silence between us was thick, almost suffocating. She wanted to say something, but she couldn't. I could see it in her eyes. She was choking on the words. I didn't move either. I just stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the faint tick of the clock on the wall, the only sound filling the empty space. The world outside that room felt like it didn't exist anymore. She looked down at the suitcase, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. It was fleeting, but it was there. It only lasted a second before she wiped it away, masking it with a cold mask of indifference. "I never meant for things to get like this," she said, finally breaking the silence. I almost laughed. Almost. "You never meant for things to get like this?" I echoed, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "No, Marissa, you didn't mean for me to find out. That's what this is about, isn't it? You didn't think I'd ever catch on. You thought you could keep hiding it, keep pretending. Well, now I know." Her gaze flickered to the suitcase again, her expression softening for just a moment. But then she hardened. The mask went back up. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The words felt hollow, like a reflex, not genuine. "I didn't want to hurt you." "Didn't want to hurt me?" I repeated. I could feel the anger rising now, the frustration bubbling to the surface. "You've been hurting me every day for weeks, maybe longer. You just didn't care enough to stop." She flinched. It was a small thing, but it was enough. She knew. Deep down, she knew I was right. I could feel the walls closing in on us. The space in that room seemed smaller, the air thicker, as if the weight of her lies was pressing on me from all sides. I waited for her to say something more, some explanation, some reason why. But she didn't. Instead, she just stood there, holding the suitcase like it was the only thing anchoring her to this moment. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said, almost pleading, as if I could somehow make it all better with a simple apology. I shook my head slowly. "It doesn't matter. You've crossed the line, Marissa. There's no going back." Her face crumpled slightly, and for a moment, I thought she might break down. But she didn't. She just blinked rapidly, trying to hold it together. She looked at me like she was waiting for me to say something more, to change my mind, to go back to being the man I was before I knew the truth. But that man was gone. I felt a strange numbness take over me, like my mind was detaching from the scene before me. She was still holding the suitcase, still standing in front of me, but it all felt unreal. Like I was watching someone else's life unfold in front of me, not my own. "I don't know what you want me to say," she muttered finally, her voice small. "I don't know what you want me to do." Leave," I interrupted, my voice cold. The word was simple, but it carried everything I needed to say. She looked like I had slapped her. Her eyes widened in shock. "What? Leave, Marissa," I repeated. "Take the suitcase and go." She looked at me as though she couldn't quite believe what I was saying. "You're really doing this?" she asked, her voice cracking. "After everything we've been through, you're just going to throw it all away?" I didn't flinch. "You've already thrown it all away." She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, she turned slowly, dragging the suitcase behind her. Each step was heavy, as though she was carrying more than just the bag. It was as if she were carrying the weight of everything she had done, all the lies she'd woven, all the time she'd stolen from me. The door clicked shut behind her, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I was alone. But I wasn't sure if I was relieved or devastated. Maybe both. The truth had been set free, and now, I had to figure out how to live with it. I stood there in the silence after she left, the weight of everything hanging in the air like a thick fog. The door clicked shut behind her, and for a long moment, I just stood there, unable to move, unable to think clearly. It felt like my whole world had just shifted, and I was struggling to keep my balance. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I had actually done it. I had finally called her out, forced her to confront the lies she'd been spinning for so long. But why did it feel so hollow? Why did I feel like I had lost more than just her? I slowly sank down onto the couch, my hands shaking as I ran them through my hair. The anger that had fueled me just moments ago had turned into something else. Something colder, emptier. My mind kept replaying the moments before. The The look on her face when I handed her that suitcase, the way she faltered, the way she seemed to finally understand that I knew. But it wasn't enough. I wanted more. I wanted to hear her say it. I wanted to hear her confess, to finally admit everything. I needed closure, but I wasn't sure I'd get it. I glanced at the clock. It had been over an hour since she left, but it felt like time had stopped. I didn't know what to do next. Should I call her? Should I let it go? I couldn't decide. My thoughts were a whirlwind, each one colliding with the next. Then I heard it. A faint knock at the door. My heart skipped a beat. Could it be her? Had she come back to apologize? To beg for forgiveness? No, it couldn't be. She was gone, wasn't she? I stood up and slowly walked to the door, my hand hovering over the handle. I wasn't sure what to expect. But when I opened it, it wasn't Marissa. It was someone else. A man. A stranger, but not quite. He was holding something in his hand. A phone. Is Marissa here? He asked, his voice casual, but there was a hint of concern in his eyes. For a moment, I just stared at him, trying to process what was happening. He wasn't someone I recognized. And yet, there was something oddly familiar about him. Something about his expression made my stomach twist. No, I said finally, my voice colder than I intended. She left. The man's eyebrows furrowed. She left? But she was supposed to. He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes darting from my face to the door, as if trying to piece together the situation. I felt a rush of frustration flood through me. This was it. This was the moment where everything I had been trying to avoid had finally caught up with me. Who are you? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He hesitated, then gave a small, almost apologetic smile. I'm Dustin. We were supposed to meet tonight. She told me you'd be busy. Dustin. The name echoed in my mind, and for a second, I was paralyzed. It was him, the man who had been texting her, the one whose messages I'd seen on her phone, the one she had been hiding from me. My throat went dry. So, you're the one she's been seeing? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting the question. Look, man, I didn't mean for things to get this complicated. I cut him off. You're right about one thing. It's complicated. I could feel the anger bubbling up again, but this time, it wasn't just about Marissa. It was about everything. About the lies, the deception, the way she had made a fool of me for so long. Dustin stood there awkwardly, shifting his weight from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable. I don't want trouble, he said, his voice softer now. I thought she was ready to move on from her marriage. I laughed bitterly. She's already moved on. You're just the last piece of the puzzle. Dustin looked down, as if suddenly realizing just how deep he was in this mess. He wasn't looking for confrontation, but that's what he got. I didn't want him here. I didn't want to hear his excuses or his attempts at explaining himself. The reality of it all was too much. Marissa had already walked away, and now this guy was standing in my doorway, acting as if he didn't know the damage he had caused. Without another word, I slammed the door in his face. The sound of the door closing echoed through the apartment, and I collapsed back onto the couch, my hands gripping the fabric tightly. The weight of it all felt heavier than ever now. I had confronted Marissa. I had kicked her out. But this was different. This was the moment where the truth about everything hit me square in the chest. I had been living in a lie, but now it was all unraveling before me. I wasn't sure what was worse, knowing that she had been unfaithful, or that the man standing in front of me had known exactly what he was doing the whole time. I sat there for what felt like hours, but in reality, it was probably just a few minutes. The events of the last few days, the lies, the betrayal, everything, were still running through my mind like a film on loop. Dustin's face had stayed with me. He had looked like a man who knew he was in the wrong, but couldn't quite bring himself to admit it. He wasn't sorry, not really. He didn't care about the damage he'd caused. All he cared about was his own selfish desire to get what he wanted. I couldn't understand how things had gone so wrong. Marissa, my wife, the woman I thought I knew, had been living a double life. And here I was, sitting alone in a silent apartment, waiting for answers that I would never get. The doorbell rang again, cutting through the silence. I stood up, tension coursing through me. I wasn't sure if I wanted to answer it, if I even should. But the person on the other side of that door was someone I knew too well. I was almost certain it was Marissa. I opened the door cautiously, and there she was. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from crying, but she wasn't here for sympathy. She wasn't here to explain herself or apologize. No, she was here for something else entirely. I need to talk, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't invite her in. I just stood there, my hand still gripping the door handle. I had no interest in hearing more of her excuses, more of the lies she had fed me over the years. But she looked at me with those eyes, desperate, pleading, and I knew, deep down, that this moment was inevitable. I'm not leaving until we talk, she continued, stepping forward. Something inside me snapped. You don't get to do this anymore, Marissa, I said, my voice hard. You've already said everything that needs to be said. I'm done. She paused, as if the words had hit her harder than expected. Please, just let me explain. I didn't want this to happen. Then why did it? I shot back, stepping away from the door. Why did you go behind my back? Why did you lie to me? I never meant for it to go this far, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It just happened, and I don't want to hear it. The words came out before I could stop them. You made your choice. She looked at me, her face crumpling as if she could see the finality in my eyes. I'm sorry, she said again. But this time, the apology didn't sound like it was meant for me. It sounded like an apology for herself. I shook my head, the bitterness rising in my chest. Sorry isn't enough anymore, Marissa. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt like a wall, impossible to break, impossible to ignore. She had done what she had done, and now I had to figure out how to pick up the pieces of my life. But there was one thing I knew for sure. Things would never be the same. She finally turned away, slowly, as if she knew there was nothing left to salvage. She didn't ask to come back in. She didn't beg. She just left. And just like that, I was alone again. Alone with the truth. It was hard to breathe, hard to process the enormity of it all. But I knew there was no turning back now. The life I had built with her, the trust one had placed in her, had all been shattered in an instant. There was no mending it. I stared at the door for a long time, the emptiness of the room echoing in my mind. But in the end, I was left with one simple question. What now? I stood by the door long after Marissa had walked away, my mind still spinning. I hadn't asked her to stay, and for a fleeting moment, I wondered if that was the right decision. But deep down, I knew there was nothing left to say. Nothing she could say would change what had happened. I had wanted the truth, but now that I had it, it felt emptier than I could have imagined. The image of her walking out, suitcase in hand, still burned in my mind. It wasn't the goodbye I had imagined. Hell, I hadn't imagined any goodbye, but it was the one that had happened, and I was left to clean up the mess. I walked through the apartment, my fingers grazing the furniture as I moved. The space felt foreign to me now, as if it had been stripped of its meaning. Everything that had once been familiar, the sound of her voice, the warmth of her touch, the way we would laugh together at the end of a long day, felt like memories belonging to someone else. I went into the bedroom, where the bed was still made the way we'd left it that morning. There was a part of me that wanted to just collapse on it, pull the covers over my head, and forget everything. But I couldn't. The silence in the apartment was deafening, and I knew there was no escaping what had happened. I sat down on the edge of the bed and ran my hands through my hair. The weight of it all hit me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't just the affair that hurt, it was everything. The lies, the secrets, the betrayal. How had I not seen it? How had I ignored the signs for so long? I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to push the thoughts away, but they kept flooding back in waves. I kept thinking about the messages, the texts I had seen on her phone, the little moments when I knew something wasn't right but chose to look the other way. I had been blind to it all. I had trusted her. That was the worst part of it all. I had trusted her completely, and she had used that trust, taken advantage of it in a way I couldn't even begin to comprehend. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger seemed too simple, too small for the feelings that were overwhelming me now. I was numb. Numb to the idea that everything I had believed in, everything I had fought for, was just gone. And yet, a strange calm washed over me. It wasn't relief, it wasn't peace, but it was something else. A quiet understanding. I had no choice now but to move forward. There was no going back. I stood up and grabbed my phone. The same one she had used to send those messages. The same one she had thought I would never look at. I opened it, hesitated for a moment, and then dialed the one number I had been avoiding for days. It rang once, twice. Then, finally, a voice on the other end. Hello. It was Dustin. The man who had been the other part of this betrayal. The other side of the story I hadn't wanted to hear. But now I needed to hear it. I needed to understand everything. You can stop pretending, I said, my voice low and steady. I know everything. And you're going to hear it from me now. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, followed by a sigh. Look, man, I never meant for any of this to happen. I laughed bitterly. Of course you didn't. But it did happen. And now you're going to explain why you thought it was okay to play with someone else's life. You're going to explain how you thought it was okay to ruin a marriage for your own selfish pleasure. There was silence on the other end. I could practically hear him fidgeting, trying to come up with an answer. But there was no answer that could make this okay. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said finally, his voice shaky. It just happened. We didn't plan it. Don't lie, I cut him off. You knew what you were doing. You knew exactly what you were doing. You knew the moment you crossed that line. I didn't know it would go this far, he replied, his voice barely audible. But I thought she was done with you. I didn't know. I didn't know you'd find out. I clenched my fists, my anger bubbling back to the surface. You thought she was done with me? You think that's an excuse? You don't get to hide behind that. You don't get to pretend that it wasn't a choice you made. And it's a choice that's cost both of us. There was a long pause. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I never wanted to be part of this. I felt the weight of his words, but I didn't feel any sympathy. Not for him. Not for Marissa. They had both made their choices, and now they had to live with them. I hung up without another word. I didn't need to hear more. I didn't need his apologies. I stared at the phone in my hand for a long time, feeling the numbness return. The phone call hadn't brought any answers. It hadn't made anything clearer, but it had done one thing. It had confirmed something I already knew. I was alone now, and the path ahead was mine to walk. I sat in the quiet of the apartment, the phone call with Dustin still echoing in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling of coldness that had settled inside me. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization of how deeply I had been fooled. I hadn't expected closure from him. After all, he was just another piece of this twisted puzzle. But something about hearing his voice, hearing him squirm, made it real. This wasn't just a bad dream I could wake up from. This was my life now, and I had to figure out how to move forward. But how? What was I supposed to do with this emptiness? With the wreckage of a life I had worked so hard to build? I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the city below. The world outside seemed so normal, so unaffected by what had just transpired. People went on with their lives, oblivious to the storm that had just wrecked mine. I had always thought that if the truth ever came out, I would feel better. I'd find some kind of relief. But now that it had, I felt nothing but a crushing weight. The truth had set me free, but it had also shattered me. I walked back to the kitchen, running my fingers over the counter, the same counter where we had spent so many evenings together, laughing, cooking, talking about our days. Now, it felt foreign, empty. How could something so familiar feel so cold? I picked up the bottle of wine we had shared just days ago, before everything had fallen apart. The bottle was still half full, untouched since the last time we'd opened it together. I poured myself a glass, staring into the deep red liquid as I swirled it in the glass. What was I supposed to do now? How could I move on from this? The thought of moving on felt like an impossible task. My mind kept circling back to Marissa, to the way she had looked at me when I handed her that suitcase. The confusion, the guilt. Did she really think I would forgive her? Did she even understand the extent of what she had done? I drank the wine slowly, savoring the bitterness as it slid down my throat. The alcohol didn't numb the pain, but it dulled it, just for a little while. The sound of a car engine in the distance broke the silence, and I stood up again, walking to the window. I watched a car drive by, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The thought crossed my mind. Was she with him now? Was she with Dustin, in the same way she had been with me? The image of them together made my stomach twist, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I wanted to forget, to let go, but the truth was too powerful to ignore. It had changed everything. I couldn't keep living in the past, in the hurt and the anger. I had to move forward, even if it meant doing it alone. It was hard to accept, but I knew it was the only way. I set the glass down and grabbed my keys. I didn't know where I was going, but I needed to get out. I needed to clear my head, even if just for a moment. As I stepped out the door, the weight of the night pressed down on me. But something else was there too. A strange sense of resolve. I had been broken, yes, but I wasn't defeated. I would rebuild. I would find my way again. and I would never let anyone hurt me like this again. It had been weeks since that night. Weeks since Marissa walked out with that suitcase, leaving behind the remnants of a life I no longer recognized. It was hard to say how I got through those days. There were moments when I felt like I might drown in the pain, but somehow I didn't. The first thing I did was take a long, hard look at myself. I had been so caught up in the hurt and anger, so blinded by betrayal, that I'd forgotten to care for myself. I started focusing on what mattered: my health, my work, my life. I picked up hobbies I had abandoned, spent time with friends I had pushed away, and slowly, I began to remember who I was before Marissa. I wasn't just a husband. I wasn't just a man defined by someone else's choices. I was me, and I had a future to build. As for Marissa, well, the truth has a way of coming out. And I made sure it did. I didn't do it out of revenge, at least not entirely. I did it because she deserved to face the consequences of her actions. I started by reaching out to some of her friends, people she had kept in her life for years but had never let me get close to. I told them what had happened. They were shocked, of course. Some of them didn't believe me at first, but the evidence was irrefutable. Her lies, her affair, it all came to light. The whispers started, and soon, her world began to crumble. It didn't take long for her to lose the respect of people she'd once called family. Her social circle began to shrink as the truth spread. People stopped inviting her to events. The calls and messages from her friends slowed, then stopped altogether. She was left standing alone, the way she had left me. The karma was slow but relentless, and I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. Because the one thing she never understood, until it was too late, was that you can't destroy someone's life and expect to walk away without consequences. One evening, about 2 months after she left, I got a message from her. It was short, but the tone was unmistakable. "Can we talk?" I didn't respond immediately. In fact, I almost didn't respond at all. But then I remembered something my father once told me. When you've been wronged, the best revenge is living well. So, that's exactly what I did. I thought about it for a day, then decided to reply. "We can talk, but don't expect it to change anything." She agreed to meet at a cafe we used to go to, a place that held too many memories. When I arrived, I saw her sitting there, looking almost the same as she had when I first met her, beautiful, but now with a weariness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. The life I once shared with her seemed so distant now. She looked at me with a mixture of regret and guilt, but there was also something else, something colder, something that told me she knew what had happened to her. "I've been thinking about everything," she said, her voice quiet. "About us, about the lies." I nodded, keeping my emotions in check. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I had healed. But I couldn't pretend that this conversation was going to change anything. "Do you regret it?" I asked, my voice steady. "Do you regret what you did?" She looked away for a moment before meeting my eyes. "I do," she said softly. "I never meant to hurt you. I just lost myself somewhere along the way." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The truth was, there was nothing left to fix between us. We were done, and no amount of regret could change that. "I've moved on, Marissa," I said after a long silence. "And I'm better for it. I'm not the man I was when you left, and I'm not looking back." Her eyes searched mine, perhaps hoping for some kind of forgiveness, but I wasn't offering that. Not because I didn't want to, but because it wasn't necessary. I had forgiven her long before she asked, but forgiveness didn't mean I had to let her back into my life. She sighed, and for the first time, I saw her shoulders slump. She was defeated, and it wasn't because of me. It was because of the choices she had made, the choices that had led her down this path. "Goodbye, Marissa," I said, standing up from the table. "I hope you find what you're looking for." I left the cafe without looking back. The door closed softly behind me, and I walked into the world I had started to rebuild, a world where I was no longer defined by the woman who had walked out on me. As for her, I didn't care. The truth had set me free, and now I was living the life I deserved. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew that she would eventually understand what it felt like to lose everything. But that wasn't for me to worry about anymore. I had already won. Please like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. I read them all.